The date is 28th of August 2016. My name is Daniel Witek. Everyone wants to believe that if they were accused of something falsely, that they would be given the benefit of the doubt and that we are all innocent until we are proven guilty. But such is not the case. As this is written on an emergency basis, this video is not going to be high on polish or refinement. Only truth. Only fact. I have over 100 hours of legally made audio recordings and other documents to verify my assertions. I am standing in front of you because dozens of lawyers, judges, congressmen, property developers, powerful business people, bankers, and others are desperate to avoid the truth being revealed regarding their criminal malfeasance, misconduct, and complete dereliction of their fiduciary responsibility to the Buffalo History Museum, formerly known as the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society. I can prove that some of these people are now engaging in malpractice and/or criminal misconduct in an effort to crush me. If I am innocent, then they are guilty. Since I can prove my innocence and the atrocious state of affairs at the Buffalo History Museum archive, I am a threat. I can prove my own attorney, Patrick J. Brown, is guilty of gross misconduct, has avoided collecting easily available evidence, failed to contact witnesses for over 16 months, and has month after month screamed, menaced, threatened, and cursed hour after hour. Mr. Brown's extraordinary conduct began less than 5 minutes into our first consultation. Cynthia Van Ness, archive director of the Buffalo History Museum, has lied repeatedly to law enforcement and others in an effort to protect negligent museum board members over decades, her own position at the museum, and the shocking truth regarding decades of thefts, losses, illegal public sales of museum materials, and materials which were supposedly donated to the museum, but which were, in fact, never delivered. Members of the Buffalo History Museum board, and it is an absurdly large board, 24 members in the 1980s and still 20 today, for an institution large enough to warrant a board of perhaps 7 or 9 members. Hence, the left hand, as it were, if it even cares, usually does not know what the right hand is doing. But the board has known since at least 1968 that the vast and extremely valuable collection of the archive, which should contain perhaps 2 million items, has been robbed, looted by archive employees, and is shockingly lacking in appropriate documentation and inventory. I became aware of all of this commencing in the autumn of 2014, after my attorney at the time, Michael Deal, Esquire, obtained some material from the Buffalo History Museum archive. I utilized my research skills to expand upon those documents. The case against me commenced on 24 May 2013. The Buffalo History Museum board, curators, and staff have known since at least 1968, after all, it was front-page news in the major regional newspapers, that the curator of manuscripts had been charged with a major theft, and the president of the board was quoted in the New York Times when he promised that a full inventory would be taken after the fact, that the archive collection was being plundered, that the archive lacked inventories, inventory control, and security. They lied to the public, and an inventory which was promised 50 years ago was never commenced, let alone completed, and an inventory of the entire archive has never been done in over a century. They were aware of thefts by senior curatorial staff, and they did nothing to ameliorate the situation year after year. The Buffalo History Museum receives hundreds of thousands of dollars twice per year, decade after decade, from taxpayers through the Office of the Erie County Comptroller. This does not include any other governmental grant or funding. Yet, when the Buffalo History Museum, or the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, as it was then known, was repeatedly and discreetly asked for records by the Office of the Comptroller in the early 1980s, believe it or not, what is supposed to be a public institution refused. The Buffalo History Museum, if one looks over decades, is a self-perpetuating club. Even void of large donations, family members, fathers to sons, law partners to law partners, and so on, as one checks the roster of decades of board members. Hardly an incentive to publicly discuss the negligence, misconduct, and malfeasance of previous and current members. A case in point. The Honorable Henry Nowak is a presiding Superior Court judge in Buffalo, New York. His Honor was the Buffalo History Museum Board President in 2013 when the case against me was commenced in May of that year. The father of Judge Nowak served as Erie County Comptroller from the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s, then as a U.S. Congressman and Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society board member. The elder Nowak, who would personally sign the large semi-annual checks to the museum, presided as comptroller during the 1968 museum scandal and for several years thereafter. Yet he did nothing as Erie County Comptroller, congressman, or museum board member to compel the urgent requisite changes to the museum archive. Nor is there any record that as of spring 2013, at the commencement of this case, his son, Judge Nowak, then Buffalo History Museum Board President, initiated or cooperated in any action to halt or ameliorate this crisis of theft, negligence, and abysmal record-keeping. Cynthia Van Ness, Buffalo History Museum Archive Director, assured me a full inventory of the Goodyear collection existed. I would never handle materials as a volunteer or as a paid consultant for an institution that wasn't properly inventoried. I offered audio tape of my conversations with her to law enforcement in 2013. I made these audio recordings because Ms. Van Ness had left me so horribly exposed. It was only after I had spent perhaps 10 or 12 hours of voluntary service on the Goodyear collection that she announced to me, contrary to her previous statements, that she guesses that an inventory doesn't exist. And so I was left in a very exposed position. In my naivete, I imagined that the truth and proof of the truth would set me free. So I made these audio recordings of conversations with Ms. Van Ness just to verify the truth in case the truth were needed. I never imagined that the truth would be required in such an extraordinary way. And I offered this to law enforcement in 2013, and they just sneered at me and told me that I could produce it at a trial. That's if the judge would allow it in. Because of the misconduct and abuse I received at the hands of my attorney, Patrick J. Brown, from April to November of 2015, I wrote respectful letters to Judge H. Kenneth Schrader and Federal District Judge William Scretany, offering them audio recordings as proof of Mr. Brown's gross misconduct, proof that he is, for lack of better description, deliberately throwing my case. I've given hours of testimony in the presence of a federal judge, interacted with legal staff. My former attorney, Mr. Michael Deal, said repeatedly in the presence of witnesses that I was one of his favorite clients in a 20-year career, dealt with this case politely and discreetly and professionally, without dumping information onto the internet. But now I truly have no alternative. When I wrote to Judges Schrader and Scretany in November 2015 regarding Mr. Brown's misconduct, and offering proof of his misconduct, incontrovertible evidence in Mr. Brown's own voice, no one wanted to view the evidence, but no one accused me of being unbalanced. I did not expect the misconduct of Mr. Brown to in any way alter the circumstances of my case. I only wanted to make it absolutely clear that there was no possible way that any sane person could consider this man acting as a defense counsel when he conducted himself on a regular basis like a domineering prosecuting attorney or a corrupt police officer. Therefore, I felt I had no alternative but to file an official complaint against Mr. Brown to the Erie County Bar Association Grievance Committee for Professional Ethics and Misconduct in early April of 2016. Within 48 hours of the committee receiving my complaint against Mr. Brown petitioned the court for me to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. 3 years of me handling this case and dealing with myriad officials and numerous court appearances and drafting of paperwork in various counsel, and only after I have told the Bar Association Grievance Committee that I am willing to offer them audio tape recordings that absolutely prove Mr. Brown's guilt, do I suddenly require a psychiatric evaluation. The Bar Association Grievance Committee responded in the person of Mr. Craig Semple, an investigator for the committee, sending a civil letter back to me in April of 2016 saying that my complaint was not formatted correctly, and would I please reformat the complaint and then it could be resubmitted, and in the meantime they would do absolutely nothing until they received a reformatted complaint. There was no confidential information, no names, addresses, telephone numbers, and so forth in the letter, and of course the letter was written by Mr. Semple directly to me. Well, a couple of days ago, excuse me, this is all very difficult, ladies and gentlemen, you have no idea. A couple of days ago, on the 26th of August 2016, I called Mr. Semple at his office and asked if I could have a copy of the letter that he wrote to me in April of this year. He absolutely refused to permit me to honor this simple request. No matter how I asked, he refused. When I told him that there was an attorney out of state who might be willing to assist me, he said, well, it's confidential information, so I won't give it to you. And I said, well, I won't explain further. There is a recording of that conversation with Mr. Semple that is part of this submission to the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, you decide if Mr. Semple and the committee were reasonable or not. The United States attorney in this case, William Hochul, husband of Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, is the head of the district office which is prosecuting this case. Why has Mr. Hochul not recused his office from this case and requested a special prosecutor over 3 years ago, when Mr. Hochul is well aware that he has close relationships and associations with persons who are connected in the upper echelons of the Buffalo History Museum? It would seem obvious on its face that this prosecution could not be done impartially. Why is it that Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael DiGiacomo, who has been with this case from the beginning since May of 2013, less than 1 month after the commencement of this case, Mr. DiGiacomo lied in writing to the court in a submission to Federal Magistrate Judge H. Kenneth Schrader, in which he stated in writing, among other things, that I had, against court orders, gone into the Grosvenor Room of the main Buffalo and Erie County Public Library at Lafayette Square. There was video surveillance footage in the hands of Mr. DiGiacomo several days prior to the hearing that would decide whether I would be thrown in jail on trumped-up, erroneous lies, or if I would be allowed, as a sick man caring for his elderly mother, to remain at liberty. Mr. DiGiacomo made this written submission to the court, but he made certain that the video surveillance footage which proved my truthfulness could not possibly have gotten into the hands of my counsel, because he sent it by U.S. mail after 5 p.m. the day immediately prior to an early morning hearing, to make absolutely certain that evidence that had been in his hands for several days could not be viewed and argued by my counsel. This is less than a month after the commencement of this case. The number of malfeasance, the number of improprieties in this case are extraordinary. There is an audio cassette recording that is highly exculpatory, a conversation between myself and Buffalo History Museum archive director Cynthia Van Ness, which has been in the hands of law enforcement since May of 2013. In September of 2013, my counsel at the time, Marianne Mariano, viewed this cassette with her associate, Kim Schechter. The cassette, I don't know if it was technically in the hands of the Office of the U.S. Attorney or the FBI, but was in the hands of law enforcement. They then came and reported to me an hour or two later that they had, in fact, viewed this highly exculpatory cassette. They didn't listen to the cassette, they did not have the opportunity, but they viewed this cassette that was I beg your pardon, marked in a very particular way with the initials KBW, like King Batavia William on one side, and CVN for Cynthia Van Ness, although the very tiny handwriting on the side of the microcassette made it questionable as to whether it was CVN or CBN, but it was a cassette that I had told them about months earlier. It was marked in a very particular way. Normally I would only have the conversation with one person on one cassette, but because I lacked cassettes at the time, there was KBW on the one side and CVN on the other. They clearly saw and discussed having seen this cassette with me within a few hours of having viewed it. However, when I told Miss Mariano how delighted I was and how surprised I was after the previous double dealing of Mr. DiGiacomo, that they acknowledged having this highly exculpatory cassette, Miss Mariano said to me that perhaps the reason was that they did not as yet realize its value. When I asked Miss Mariano if she thought there'd be any difficulty in obtaining this highly exculpatory evidence, and that Mr. DiGiacomo would actually obey the law and turn this important evidence over to us. Ladies and gentlemen, I've done public service work for museums, libraries, and archives for over 35 years. At one point, my attorney Michael Deal walked into court with a stack an inch thick of letters of gratitude from libraries and museums for services I had done pro bono, donations I had made anonymously. I've done everything in my power to protect the culture and history that makes us the people that we are, that count for something when we're gone. In 2012 alone, and this is the first time this has been said publicly by me or anyone else, in 2012 alone, I donated over $18,000 worth of art, architecture, photography, and history books to rural, impoverished, small libraries in this area. Niagara, Orleans, Monroe, Erie, but always to impoverished, small, regional libraries that couldn't possibly spend money on such things. Where the Goodyear collection is concerned, the library had 50 years to inventory the collection. Miss Van Ness knew that I was selling similar papers. She lied about this to law enforcement, but there's audio tape evidence that one of the reasons that she requested my assistance in looking at Goodyear material is because she knew in advance that I had Goodyear material of my own that I was in the process of selling. You will see on the internet a statement not just notarized, but sworn under oath by a long-term employee of the Memorial Art Gallery, who viewed this material in my possession in 2011, approximately a year and a half before the instigation of my pro bono service to the Buffalo History Museum. Aardvark. Ladies and gentlemen, a private investigator, Lou Barone, who even does work for the local FBI, made an audio recording of a couple of visits he made to the Buffalo History Museum archive in 2014, and he made it a point, Mr. Byrne made it a point of dealing with Ms. Van Ness directly. Ms. Van Ness clearly said several times that material which is known to be in the archive collection, some of it, material which was actually on their website at the time, was not owned by the archive, that the archive owned nothing like it, that she had seen nothing like it, and yet there's documentary evidence that the material is in the archive collection. And yet this is the person who's being relied upon to hold forth on a 2 million item collection where clearly there are terrible losses and missing items and so forth. I discovered a number of extra items in the Goodyear archive that were not listed anywhere, and I brought them to the attention of Ms. Van Ness and other members of staff and members of the public who happened to be present at the time. Items that are not listed anywhere. There are in fact at least over 100 autographed letters by various authors which are in the collection which are not listed anywhere. Now, if someone were going to take anything out of the collection, wouldn't the first thing that one would take would be things that are guaranteed not to be listed or inventoried anywhere? Also, unlike others, I maintained perfect museum security protocol, surrendering all bags, all coats, and so forth to the desk, going to my workstation only with a notepad, eyeglasses, magnifying glass, light, pen light, that sort of thing, and then presenting these few items to the archive director at the time of my departure, so even those few items could be searched. This was done on every occasion by her own admission as proper conduct as I entered and as I departed the archive. So exactly, ladies and gentlemen, how could any of this ever have been done? How is it that respected people from other museums saw some of this property, at least, in my possession in 2011? And there's any dispute over this. In addition to all of the additional items that are not recorded anywhere, and those are just over 100 that I know of, there are over 100 first edition autographed books, autographed to General A. Conger Goodyear from Presidents of the United States, Charles Lindbergh, and so forth. It's not just that one or two of these books are missing, all of them are missing. Over 100 books. Think of 3.5 library shelves, and all of them are missing. And at least some, if not all of these books, have come onto the market in the years prior to my pro bono service to the archive, which clearly shows there are numerous items there which ought not be there, and many things which ought be there but are missing. Because so many lawyers and judges and congressmen and sort of captains of industry and bankers have sat on the board and knew that all of this was going on through various scandals and times in between and since, think of what it means if a bank president or a presiding judge is shown to have been utterly negligent in a public trust. What it means for their careers and their reputations. This is exactly why so many people are desperate to bury me, to deprive me even of a trial, to make certain that I am silenced, that I am sent to a hospital several hundred miles away where I can have no support from my family or friends, and I am just left on my own. It will mean that no one has to appear in a courtroom and commit perjury or tell the truth. This has completely destroyed my life, ladies and gentlemen. I've done public service work for museums and libraries for the better part of 4 decades. My mother has been brought to the brink of death over this. I've only wanted the opportunity to prove the truthful evidence that shows clearly my innocence. I've only wanted to show the proof of the gross misconduct and malpractice of Mr. Patrick J. Brown. And I'm asking all of you, even if you are not willing to assist me in any way, if there is not a member of the media, if there is not an attorney, if there is not someone who is interested in civil rights, who is willing to assist me in any way, then please assist the Buffalo History Museum. Don't let them pat the public on the head and say everything is fine, we know what we're doing, They clearly have not. And even though they have been trying desperately to catalog certain parts of the collection, put them online, and make it look all very professional, it is a tiny percentage of what they own and what they are supposed to own. Presidents and board members of other local historical societies, town historians who visit the archive regularly, have told me during the last 3 years that in their personal opinions, anywhere from 10 to 30% of what is supposed to be in the archive collection is missing, whether it's been stolen, misplaced, contrary to records, was never donated to the museum in the first place, whatever the circumstances. 10 to 30% of perhaps 2 million items are missing. I don't want to bring onto the internet names of innocent people who don't deserve to have public scrutiny and so forth, but I have offered these names and I've offered these proofs to my counsel and to the Office of the U.S. Attorney. Just because they're trying to make things on the internet look better and that they've changed some of their security protocols since this case began, it's sort of like if you open the barn doors and you let out 5,000 horses, you can't then say, when you've got 3,000 at the back, and count them up and say, we have 3,000 horses. Well, no, you don't. You've only counted what you haven't lost, mislaid, or allowed to be stolen over a 50-year period, and at least a 50-year period. Our lives have been ruined by this. If you are willing to in any way assist me personally at Buffalo History Cover-Up at yahoo.com, all lowercase, one single word, Buffalo History Cover-Up at yahoo.com. You can email me at that address. If you have your doubts about my veracity, if you are unable or unwilling to help me, write to the archive, write to the Buffalo News that was offered. The Buffalo News, Mr. Phil Fairbanks, the federal court reporter, was offered audio recordings that prove my assertions. He spent hours with me. He promised that certain highly relevant facts would be brought out in his article last year. He was offered audio recordings. What reporter is offered absolute proof of a story like this and then declines to listen to it, declines to look at documents, declines to listen to audio recordings? Well, I was simply told that too many people would be hurt by the truth in this area. I was even told this by a senior press person at the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Too sensitive, too many people who count will be harmed. Too many people who make the rain will be embarrassed and worse. So please, if you doubt my veracity and you're not willing to assist me in any way, make sure that this incredibly precious resource, there is no history of the United States that we could possibly recognize without Buffalo and the Erie Canal. There are treasures that are supposed to be in the Buffalo History Museum and in the museum archive that cannot be found anywhere else and that are priceless historically, forget financially. There is no history of this country that could be recognized without the significance of Buffalo, New York. It wouldn't matter that Thomas Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase if no one was able or willing to go west. And this extraordinary place and the hard work of our ancestors made that possible. People who donated photographs of their grandparents working hard in a steel mill, or wealthy people who donated rare book collections, gave of themselves, gave of their hearts to the collections of the History Museum to benefit all of us. And it is all in jeopardy. Force them to make an accurate, honest, public accounting of what they have and what they should have and what they do not have. I'm sorry. I'm very upset living with this for over 3 years and having to keep silent while other people have slandered me. The husband of Cynthia Van Ness has sent slanderous and defamatory email about me to people. There hasn't been any part of my life, my health, that hasn't been affected by this. I wish that I was eloquent enough to adequately impart to all of you
what this has meant in my life and the life of my family. For many years, in bad health, all I wanted to be able to do is quietly do whatever donations to libraries and whatever public service I could do. And that's been robbed from me. But the more important thing is the archive and its collections. Do not just get up from the computer and go on with your lives and say someone else will do it. Please take an active interest in this important institution and make them account for what they should have. Thank you so very much for giving me of your time. Buffalo History Cover-Up at yahoo.com, all lowercase. Thank you so much.